The Galactic enforcement vessel, Righteous Judgment, drifted through the void with the silent menace of a predator stalking wounded prey. Commander Vexroth of the Korvani hegemony stood on the observation deck, his four segmented arms clasped behind his back as his compound eyes tracked the distant human warship on the holographic display. They have ignored 7 hails. His communications officer, a slender Palafi named Sithis, reported. Her bioluminescent markings pulsed with agitation. Standard protocol dictates we may now board and inspect. Vexrath's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. The humans had been a thorn in the Galactic Council's side for nearly 3 decades, ever since their primitive vessels had first stumbled into hegemony space. They refused to register their ships properly, declined to submit to mandatory crew inspections, and worst of all, they rejected the fundamental principles of the Galactic Accords. "Prepare the boarding craft," Vexrath commanded. "Full inspection team. I want every corridor documented, every system catalogued. The humans have flouted our laws for the last time." The vessel they approached was designated HSS Unconquered, a name that Vexrath found almost offensively arrogant. It was a mid-sized human warship, approximately 800 meters in length, with that brutalist aesthetic humans seemed to favor. Where Korvani vessels flowed with organic curves and Palathi ships shimmered with crystalline lattices, human ships looked like they had been forged in anger. Angular, armored, defiant. "Commander," Tactical Officer Krethval interrupted, his scales shifting to a cautious gray. "The human vessel has powered down its engines. They appear to be waiting." Of course they are waiting. They know resistance is futile. A single enforcement vessel could reduce that primitive craft to debris. Vexrath allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. This will serve as an example to the rest of their species. Today, humanity learns that no one stands outside galactic law. The boarding craft launched with precision, carrying Vexrath, 15 armed enforcement officers, and 3 documentation specialists. As they approached the Unconquered, Vexrath studied the vessel through the viewport. Scorch marks decorated its hull, evidence of battles the humans had no business surviving. Crude repair patches covered what must have been catastrophic breaches. And yet, the ship remained operational, its running lights glowing with stubborn persistence. The docking procedure was smooth. The humans had extended an umbilical, which Vexrath interpreted as submission. His team assembled in the airlock, weapons primed, translation devices calibrated. The inner door hissed open. They were met by a single human. Vexrath had studied human physiology extensively in preparation for this mission, but nothing had prepared him for confronting one in person. The creature was shorter than expected, barely 2 meters tall, and lacked any visible natural weapons. No claws, no fangs, no armored plates. Its skin was an unsettling pink-brown, stretched over what appeared to be a fragile skeleton. And yet, the human stood with an unsettling stillness. Its eyes, those strange, wet orbs with whites and colored irises, fixed on Vexrath with an intensity that made his secondary heart flutter. "Commander Vexrath, I presume." The human's voice was deep, carried through the translation device with only minor distortion. "I'm Captain Sarah Chen of the Unconquered. You may conduct your inspection." No resistance, no argument, just calm acceptance. It felt wrong. You understand the gravity of this situation? Vexwrath pressed, his antenna twitching. Failure to comply with galactic inspection protocols carries severe penalties. Ship impoundment, crew detention, potential dissolution of your species' limited spacefaring privileges. Captain Chen's face performed a subtle movement, the corners of her mouth pulling upward, her eyes crinkling slightly. The translation device tagged it as a smile, but offered no context for its meaning in this situation. I understand perfectly, Commander. Please, allow me to escort you personally. She turned and walked into the ship without waiting for acknowledgement. After a moment of hesitation, Vexwrath signaled his team to follow. The corridors of the Unconquered were exactly as he had expected. Utilitarian, metal-walled, poorly lit by human standards, which meant painfully bright by Korvani preferences. But there was something else, a warmth that his environmental sensors couldn't quite quantify, a sense of occupation that went beyond mere crew presence. We'll begin with your cargo manifests, Vexwrath announced. Article 447 of the Galactic Accords requires all vessels to maintain detailed records of transported goods, crew composition, and mission parameters. Of course. Captain Chen led them deeper into the ship. Our quartermaster will provide whatever documentation you require. They passed several human crew members in the corridors, all of whom stepped aside respectfully, but watched the inspection team with those unsettling eyes. Vexwrath noted their diversity, variations in skin tone, height, hair texture, body composition. Unlike most species, humans seemed to lack standardization. Tell me, Captain, Vexwrath said as they walked, why did your vessel ignore our hails? Standard procedure dictates immediate response to enforcement communications. Our communications array suffered damage in our last engagement, Chen replied smoothly. We received your transmissions but couldn't respond. Repair crews are working on it now. A convenient excuse. Vexwrath filed it away for later citation. They arrived at what appeared to be a storage bay. The quartermaster, a heavy-set human male with skin the color of dark wood, stood waiting with a data tablet. Cargo manifests, crew roster, mission logs, the man said, offering the device, everything by the book. Vexwrath passed the tablet to his documentation specialists, who immediately began scanning and comparing the data against galactic standards. He used the opportunity to survey the cargo bay itself. Standard shipping containers lined the walls, their contents labeled with human text that his visual translator rendered into galactic common. Medical supplies, food stores, water purification equipment, emergency shelter components. You're running relief supplies? Vexwrath's mandibles clicked with surprise. To where? Kepler 442, Captain Chen replied. The colony there experienced a seismic event. They've requested humanitarian assistance. That colony is in Contested Zone 7, Krethval interjected. Human vessels are prohibited from that region under Article 891. Contested by whom? Chen asked mildly. The Cathari abandoned those systems 2 centuries before humans achieved spaceflight. The Palathi never claimed them, and the Korvani hegemony declared them of no strategic value in your own territorial surveys. That is not the point, Vexwrath snapped. The zone is classified as restricted. Your presence there violates galactic law. 100,000 human colonists will die without these supplies, Chen said, her voice remaining steady. They ran out of clean water 3 days ago. Children are already sick. Then they should petition the Galactic Council for emergency authorization. The proper channels exist for such situations. The proper channels take 6 weeks. The colonists have 6 days. Vexrath's compound eyes narrowed. That is not our concern. The law is the law. Captain Chen's smile faded. For a moment, something flickered behind her eyes, something that made Vexrath's instincts scream at him to step back, to signal his team, to prepare for violence. But the moment passed, and she simply nodded. "Shall we continue the inspection?" They proceeded through the ship. Engineering, where the massive fusion reactors hummed with barely contained power. The medical bay, surprisingly well equipped for such a small vessel. The armory. "Stop!" Vexrath held up a segmented arm. "Open this door." Captain Chen's expression remained neutral. "That's our armory. Standard military vessel. Nothing unusual." "Open it." She pressed her palm against a scanner, and the heavy door slid aside. Vexrath stepped into the room and felt his secondary heart stutter. Weapons lined the walls. Human weapons. Kinetic projectile accelerators capable of punching through Korvani armor. Plasma launchers that rivaled hegemony military hardware. Explosive ordnances in quantities that would have required special permits even for enforcement vessels. And in the center of the room, mounted on a display stand, was something that stopped Vexrath cold. It was a blade, a simple metal blade, perhaps half a meter long, with a wrapped handle and a slight curve to its edge. The documentation specialist's scanners immediately tagged it as steel. Iron and carbon, nothing special, the sort of primitive alloy that pre-spaceflight civilizations used before discovering more efficient materials. But it was the display that drew his attention. The blade was mounted on a velvet cushion, illuminated by a single spotlight, surrounded by images and plaques that his translator processed as names, dates, and something called honorifics. "What is this?" Vexrath demanded. "A sword," Captain Chen said. "Specifically, a katana. This particular one belonged to my great-great-great-grandmother. She carried it during Earth's unification wars." "It's a weapon." "It's more than that." Chen stepped forward, her fingers hovering over the blade without touching it. "It's a symbol, a reminder. Every vessel in the human navy carries something like this, an artifact from our past, from the days before we reached the stars." "Why?" Chen was quiet for a moment. "To remember who we were, what we survived, and why we fight." Vexrath didn't understand, and he didn't particularly care to. Article 223 prohibits the transport of unregistered weapons. This artifact appears nowhere in your manifest. Cultural items are exempt under... "Not when they are weapons," Vexrath cut her off. "This is a violation. Document it." His specialists moved forward, scanners ready. But before they could begin their work, something strange happened. A human crew member appeared in the doorway. Young, barely past adolescence by human standards, with close-cropped hair and a face still soft with youth. The rank insignia on their uniform marked them as a junior officer. "Captain," the young human said, "we're receiving a transmission from Kepler 442, Priority 1. Chen's expression shifted, the first genuine emotion Vexrath had seen from her since the inspection began. "Put it through." "Captain, the Galactic Enforcement Officers." "Put it through, Lieutenant." The armory's wall screen flickered to life, and Vexrath found himself looking at a scene that would haunt his dreams for years to come. The transmission came from what appeared to be a makeshift medical facility. Cots lined the floor, packed so tightly that there was barely room to walk between them. Each cot contained a human, many of them small, clearly children, wrapped in thin blankets, their faces pale and drawn. A human woman appeared on screen, her eyes red-rimmed, her voice cracking as she spoke. "Unconquered. This is Dr. Yuki Tanaka at Colony Medical. We've lost 17 more today, mostly children. Our antibiotics are exhausted, and the water purification system failed completely this morning. We're boiling what we can, but it's not enough." She paused, drawing a shaky breath. "How soon can you arrive?" Captain Chen's face had transformed. Gone was the calm detachment she'd shown throughout the inspection. In its place was something raw, a fury barely contained behind her eyes, a grief that pulled at the corners of her mouth. "We've experienced a delay, Dr. Tanaka. Galactic Enforcement has boarded our vessel for inspection." On the screen, Dr. Tanaka's expression crumbled. "An inspection? Now? Captain, we don't have time." "I know." Chen's voice was gentle but firm. "Keep your people alive, Yuki. We're coming." The transmission ended. The armory fell silent. Vexwrath felt the weight of every eye in the room, human and alien alike, settle upon him. For a moment, an absurd moment, he felt something he couldn't quite name, something uncomfortable, something that made him want to look away from Captain Chen's eyes. He crushed it. "Continue the inspection," he ordered. "Document the unregistered weapon and proceed to the crew quarters." They moved through the ship like a funeral procession. The humans they passed no longer stepped aside respectfully. Now they watched with open hostility, though none made any move to interfere. Vexwrath caught fragments of their whispered conversations through his enhanced hearing. Bureaucratic nonsense while people die. Always the same, no matter what. "Captain'll find a way. She always does." Crew quarters revealed more violations. Personal items that hadn't been properly cataloged. Family photographs that technically qualified as unauthorized decorative materials. A small plant growing in a pot beside someone's bunk. A violation of 17 different environmental contamination statutes. "This is absurd," Krethval muttered, for once agreeing with the humans. "We're citing them for a potted plant while a colony faces extinction?" "The law does not discriminate based on circumstance," Vexwrath replied automatically. "Every violation is equal in the eyes of justice." But even as he said the words, they felt hollow. They reached the bridge. It was smaller than Vexwrath expected. Compact, efficient, designed for function rather than intimidation. Human officers manned various stations, their attention split between their duties and the alien inspection team. The main view screen showed a star map, with a pulsing point marking the location of Kepler 442. 3 days away at standard speed, Vexwrath noted. More than enough time for the colony to collapse completely. "Commander," one of his documentation specialists approached. "We've completed our preliminary assessment." "Report." 47 violations of Galactic Accord protocols. 12 involve Article 223 weapons regulations. 23 involve cargo documentation discrepancies. The remainder are various environmental and cultural infractions. The specialist hesitated. "However, I should note that none of these violations rise to the level of critical offenses. Under standard procedure, they would result in citations, fines, and mandatory compliance review, not ship impoundment or crew detention." Vexwrath felt the tension in the room shift. The human officers were listening intently, hope flickering in their strange eyes. "That assessment assumes full cooperation with the inspection process," Vexwrath said carefully. "Captain Chen, I will require access to your vessel's command logs, all command decisions for the past standard year." Chen's jaw tightened. Those are classified military records. Article 556 provides Galactic enforcement with access to all records during a formal inspection. Refusal to comply elevates this matter to a critical offense. "Commander," Sithis interjected, her bioluminescent markings pulsing with distress, "perhaps we could—" "The logs, Captain." For a long moment, Chen simply stared at him. Then she turned to her first officer, a tall, graying human male with scars on his face and hands, and nodded. "Give him access, Commander Park." Park's expression suggested he'd rather void himself into space, but he complied. Moments later, a new data stream appeared on Vexrath's personal display. He began reading. The first entries were routine: patrol routes, supply runs, the mundane operations of a military vessel. But as he scrolled further, the nature of the Unconquered's missions became clear. 3 months prior, evacuation of a human research station in the Outer Territories. The station had been attacked by Kethari raiders, illegal under approximately 400 different articles of Galactic law, but the Kethari had never faced meaningful consequences. The Unconquered had responded to the distress call despite being explicitly prohibited from that region. 6 months prior, medical supplies delivered to a refugee camp in the Palathi Neutral Zone. The refugees were Dothari, a species that had refused hegemony membership and thus existed outside galactic protection. Human law had no jurisdiction there. Human resources shouldn't have been spent there. But the Unconquered had gone anyway. 9 months prior, search and rescue in the Void Straits, where a Korvani cargo vessel had suffered catastrophic engine failure. 37 Korvani crew rescued. The Unconquered had violated the Void Straits Treaty to do it, a treaty designed to prevent military vessels from entering the region. Vexrath's secondary heart began to pound. 12 months prior, direct confrontation with a slave convoy in contested Zone 4. Human intelligence had identified a group of Chak pirates transporting captive sentients, mostly juveniles, to processing facilities in the dark sectors. The Unconquered had engaged and destroyed the convoy. 216 captives rescued. Returned to their homeworlds without official documentation, without diplomatic approval, without any legal standing whatsoever. "Commander?" Sithis touched his arm. "You've gone pale." Vexrath couldn't respond. He was still reading. 18 months prior, deployment to the Ash Nebula, where a hegemony mining operation had been using conscripted labor from a pre-spaceflight civilization. The practice was technically legal under Galactic law, Article 334, subsection 12, which permitted development assistance for primitive cultures. The Unconquered had broadcast evidence of the operation to every news network in explored space. 3 days later, the Galactic Council had revised Article 334. 2 years prior, first contact with the Yavashi, a species that had been hiding in deep space to avoid hegemony integration. The Unconquered had provided them with navigational data, shield frequency rotations, and detailed schematics of Korvani patrol routes. The Yavashi had used this information to relocate their entire civilization to a region where the hegemony couldn't reach them. "This is treason," Vexrath whispered. "All of it, not just violations, criminal conspiracy against the Galactic Council." Captain Chen's voice came from directly behind him, and Vexrath spun with a start. He hadn't heard her approach. "Is it treason to save lives?" she asked quietly. "Is it criminal to protect the innocent? To stand between the helpless and those who would harm them? You have systematically undermined galactic law for years. You've conducted unauthorized military operations. You've provided material support to species attempting to evade legitimate government oversight." Vexrath stopped, struggling to process the magnitude of what he'd discovered. "How many ships? How many human vessels are engaged in these activities? Chen's smile returned. That strange, unsettling expression. Would you like the honest answer, Commander? Yes. All of them. The bridge fell silent. Every human vessel that enters space does so with a mandate, Chen continued. Not from our government, not from our military, from our people, from our history, from everything humanity has learned about what happens when good beings stand aside and let evil flourish. That's not, you can't just decide to ignore laws you find inconvenient. These aren't inconvenient laws, Commander. They're unjust ones. Chen stepped closer, and despite his training, despite his weapons, despite everything, Vexwrath found himself wanting to step back. Article 334 allowed slavery. Article 556 lets enforcement teams suppress evidence of hegemony atrocities. Article 891 keeps anyone from helping colonies that refuse to bow to the Council's demands. Those articles exist for legitimate reasons. Tell that to the children dying on Kepler 442. Chen's voice had lost all pretense of calm. Tell that to the Dothari refugees starving because the hegemony won't recognize their right to exist. Tell that to the T'Chak slaves we rescued, who would be dead now if we'd followed your precious laws. The law. The law is supposed to protect people, Chen shouted. It's supposed to provide justice, not enable oppression. And when the law fails, when it becomes a tool of the powerful against the weak, then good beings have a choice. Follow the law and let innocents suffer, or break the law and live with the consequences. Vexwrath's translator struggled with the emotional intensity of her words. Humans, he realized, spoke with their entire bodies, not just their mouths, but their hands, their eyes, every muscle in their faces. Chen was communicating on frequencies he could barely perceive. You're asking me to ignore everything I've sworn to uphold, he said finally. No, Chen shook her head. I'm asking you to remember why you swore it in the first place. I'm asking you what kind of being you want to be, what legacy you want to leave. I'm an enforcement officer. You're a person. Chen grabbed his upper arm, an impossibly bold gesture, the kind of contact that among Korvani would have been grounds for formal challenge. Underneath the uniform, underneath the regulations, you're a thinking, feeling being capable of recognizing right from wrong. So I'm asking you, is it right to let 100,000 people die so you can cite us for a potted plant? Vexwrath had no answer. The bridge hung in suspended silence. His team watched him, awaiting orders. The human crew watched him, awaiting judgment. And somewhere, 3 days away, children were dying. Commander Park, Vexwrath said slowly, the command logs you provided, they appear to be corrupted. I cannot read them. Park blinked. Sir? I said, they're corrupted. Vexwrath turned to his documentation specialists. Delete the data stream. It's useless. Understanding dawned in Chen's eyes. Commander, you have 47 minor violations, Vexwrath continued, his voice flat. Standard citations. Fines to be paid within 90 standard days. Compliance review to be scheduled at your convenience. He paused. Your inspection is complete. You may resume your course. His team stared at him in disbelief. Krethvel's scales cycled through 3 different colors of confusion. Siphus's bioluminescent markings pulsed with something that might have been approval. Commander, one of the younger officers stepped forward. This is highly irregular. The violations we discovered are minor, and have been documented, Vexrath cut him off. Our duty is complete. We will return to the righteous judgment and file our report. But the command logs were corrupted. Nothing more to say. Vexrath held the young officer's gaze until he looked away. Return to the boarding craft, now. As the inspection team filed out of the bridge, Vexrath lingered. Captain Chen stood watching him, that strange human emotion playing across her features. "You'll be executed for this," she said quietly. "When the council reviews the footage, when they see what you found and what you ignored." Perhaps. Vexrath adjusted his uniform. "But you were right about one thing, Captain. Underneath the uniform, I am a person, and I choose what legacy I leave." Chen extended her hand, another human gesture, one his database identified as a greeting or farewell between equals. "Thank you, Commander." Vexrath hesitated, then took her hand in his. Her grip was warm, surprisingly strong, absolutely alien. "Save your colony, Captain. Make this mean something." He turned and walked toward the airlock, leaving the unconquered behind. The righteous judgment broke orbit 12 hours later, ostensibly returning to base for standard resupply. In reality, Vexrath needed time to think, time to process what he had witnessed, time to understand why he had thrown away his career, perhaps his life, for a ship full of humans he would never see again. His quarters aboard the enforcement vessel were Spartan, as befitting an officer of his rank. A sleeping pod, a personal terminal, a small shrine to the ancestral spirits. He sat before the shrine now, his segmented fingers tracing the worn prayer beads his grandmother had given him. "You look troubled, Commander." Sithis stood in his doorway, her bioluminescent markings dim with concern. Palathi were empaths, to a limited degree. They could read emotional states through biochemical signals. There was no hiding from them. "Enter," Vexrath said. "Close the door." She did so, settling onto the opposite bench with fluid grace. "The crew is confused. They expected you to impound the human vessel. Some are saying you showed weakness." "And what do you think?" Sithis was quiet for a moment. "I think you showed something, but I don't believe it was weakness." "Then what?" "I'm not sure." Her markings pulsed thoughtfully. "The humans have a concept for it, I believe. They call it conscience." Vexrath's mandibles clicked. "A primitive notion. The idea that individuals should be guided by internal moral compasses rather than external law. Primitive, perhaps, but effective." Sithis leaned forward. "Commander, what did you see in those command logs? What made you let them go?" He told her, all of it. The rescues, the raids, the systematic defiance of galactic law in service of something the humans called humanitarian duty. As he spoke, Sithis's markings grew brighter and brighter until they illuminated the dim quarters like festival lights. "They're insane," she said when he finished. "They must be. No species can survive by placing individual ethics above collective law. The Council would destroy them." "The Council has been trying for 30 years, Vexrath replied. "Every sanction, every blockade, every attempt to force compliance, the humans have endured it all. They've grown stronger for it." "Because they believe they're right?" "Because they are right." The words surprised Vexrath even as he spoke them. "Sithis, I've enforced galactic law for 40 years. I've believed in the system, trusted that it serves the greater good. But today, on that ship, I watched a woman choose between following the law and saving 100,000 lives. And I realized that I would have let them die.
You didn't, though.
Only because she forced me to see the truth. Vexwrath set down his prayer beads. The law I've devoted my life to isn't justice, it's order. And order without justice is just tyranny wearing a better uniform. Sithis was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, her markings shifted to a color Vexwrath had never seen before, something between resolve and anticipation. "What are you going to do, Commander?" He met her eyes. "I'm going to change things. I'm going to use every resource, every connection, every favor I've accumulated over 4 decades to challenge the laws that allowed this situation to exist. It will take years. It may cost me everything. But I can't unknow what I know. I can't unsee what I saw." "The Council won't listen. They never do." "Then I'll make them listen." Vexwrath stood, his 4 arms spreading in a gesture of commitment. "The humans have a saying. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. I don't know if they're right, but I intend to find out." Sithis rose as well. "You won't be alone, Commander. The things you described today, I've suspected them for years. Many of us have. We just didn't have the courage to act." "And now?" "Now we have an example." She moved toward the door, pausing at the threshold. "The humans are going to change this galaxy, Commander. Not through war or conquest, but through simple, stubborn refusal to accept that things must be the way they are. And when they do, when they finally shatter the chains of laws that were never just, I want to be on the right side of history." She left, and Vexwrath was alone with his thoughts. 6 weeks later, the HSS Unconquered returned to human space. The mission to Kepler 442 had been successful, barely. They had arrived with hours to spare, distributed supplies, established emergency infrastructure, and stabilized the colony population. 93 colonists had died before help arrived, but 100,000 had survived. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck, watching Earth grow larger in the viewport. Home. She hadn't seen it in nearly 2 years, and part of her had wondered if she ever would again. The inspection had been a close thing. Another commander, a less thoughtful being, would have impounded the ship and doomed the colony. But something about Vexwrath had been different. She'd seen the conflict in his compound eyes, the war between duty and conscience, and somehow conscience had won. "Captain?" Commander Park appeared at her shoulder. "Message from Fleet Command. They want a full debriefing when we dock." "Of course they do," Chen sighed. "Any word on the Korvani? Did they file a report?" "That's the interesting part." Park handed her a data tablet. The Righteous Judgment filed a report, but it's been classified at the highest level. The only information released to the public is that we were inspected and found to have minor violations. No mention of the cargo, the colony, or anything else. Chen frowned. "That doesn't make sense. Vexwrath had enough evidence to bury us. Why hide it?" "I don't know, but there's something else." Park pulled up a second document. "This came through back channels an hour ago. It's from Sithis, the Palathi officer on the inspection team." Chen read quickly, her eyes widening with each line. The message was brief but extraordinary. Sithis reported that Commander Vexwrath had returned to the Korvani homeworld and immediately filed a formal challenge to Articles 334, 556, and 891 of the Galactic Accords. He had accused the Council of systemic injustice, cited the human missions from the Unconquered's logs as evidence of the law's failures, and demanded a complete review of enforcement protocols.
He's going to get himself killed, Chen murmured.
Maybe, Park agreed, but that's not the interesting part. Look at the last paragraph.
Chen did.
Vexwrath is not alone. In the 6 weeks since your inspection, 14 other enforcement commanders have joined his challenge. 3 Galactic Council delegates have expressed private support. And the human missions he cited, they're spreading through the network like wildfire. Every sentient with access to the feeds knows what your ship did, what all your ships have been doing. The narrative is changing, Captain. People are beginning to ask questions that the Council can't answer. You didn't just save a colony, you started something.
Sithis.
Chen set down the tablet, her hands trembling slightly. Captain? Park asked. Are you all right? I don't know. She stared at the message, at the impossible words, at the suggestion that their defiance had somehow mattered beyond the lives directly saved. I never thought. We just did what was right, what humans have always done. Maybe that's the point, Park said. Maybe doing what's right over and over, despite the consequences. Maybe that's how you change the galaxy. The Unconquered continued its approach to Earth, carrying its crew home for a brief respite before the next mission. Somewhere behind them, in the vast reaches of hegemony space, a Korvani commander was fighting a battle he couldn't win, using the only weapons that had ever mattered, truth and courage. And ahead of them, in the uncharted territories beyond explored space, 100,000 colonists were rebuilding their lives, unaware that they owed their survival to a chain of conscience that stretched across species and light years. The arc of the moral universe was long, but it was bending. Part 2, The Shattered Accords. The Galactic Council chambers had not seen such chaos in 300 years. High Counselor Morthax of the Korvani hegemony watched from his elevated platform as the assembled delegates erupted into arguments, counter-arguments, and at least 2 instances of physical confrontation that required security intervention. The crystalline domes that focused sunlight onto the speaking floor now illuminated a scene of unprecedented discord. "Order!" Morthax bellowed, his amplified voice cutting through the noise. "Order, or I will adjourn this session and have every delegate removed." The chamber quieted, though the tension remained palpable. Representatives from 73 species filled the tiered seating, their varied physiologies creating a tapestry of color, texture, and barely concealed hostility. "The motion before this body is simple," Morthax continued. "Commander Vexwrath of the Enforcement Division has formally challenged the validity of Articles 334, 556, and 891 of the Galactic Accords. Under our charter, such challenges must be heard in full assembly. The question is whether we will hear them." "We should not dignify this farce with consideration." The Kethari ambassador, a spindly creature covered in venomous spines, rose from her seat. "Vexwrath is a traitor who allowed known criminals to escape justice. His challenge is nothing more than an attempt to justify his own failures." "With respect, Ambassador, the procedural requirements are clear." The Palathi delegate, a towering figure whose bioluminescent markings pulsed with calm authority, stepped forward. "Vexwrath has secured the signatures of 14 enforcement commanders and 3 sitting council delegates. By law, his challenge must be heard." "By law?" The Kethari ambassador laughed, a harsh sound like breaking glass.
This body exists to preserve law, not to tear it apart at the whim of every malcontent who questions our wisdom."
"Then perhaps," a new voice interjected, "your wisdom should be questioned more often." Every eye in the chamber turned to the human section. Ambassador Elizabeth Blackwood stood at her delegation's platform, her silver hair pulled back in a severe style that somehow emphasized rather than softened her features. She was old by human standards, nearly 80 Earth years, but she carried herself with the straight-backed dignity that the Council had learned to associate with human leadership.
"Ambassador Blackwood," Morthax said carefully, "you do not have the floor."
"Then I request it." Blackwood's voice was calm but carried to every corner of the chamber. "The challenge before this body was prompted by actions of a human vessel. It seems appropriate that humanity should have the opportunity to address the accusations leveled against us." A ripple of unease passed through the chamber. In 30 years of human participation in galactic affairs, they had rarely requested the floor. They attended sessions, voted on matters that concerned them, and otherwise kept to themselves, a strategy that had left many species underestimating their influence.
"The floor is granted," Morthax said reluctantly. "Make your statement brief."
Blackwood smiled, that unsettling human expression that never quite conveyed what other species expected it to. "Thank you, High Counselor. I will be as brief as necessary." She stepped forward, activating a holographic display that projected into the center of the chamber. "What you see before you is a map of explored space. The blue regions represent territories under Galactic Council protection. The green regions represent areas claimed by Council member species. And the red regions? The map shifted, revealing vast swaths of crimson spreading across the display. The red regions represent areas where the Council's laws have failed to protect sentient life. "This is propaganda," the Cathari ambassador hissed. "Lies and distortions." "These are documented cases," Blackwood cut her off. "Documented by your own enforcement division, I might add. Slavery operations that continued for decades because Article 334 classified them as development assistance. Genocide that went unpunished because the victims weren't members of recognized species. Exploitation, oppression, and systematic cruelty that the Council ignored because it was inconvenient to address." "Humans have no standing to judge the Council's decisions," Morthax interjected. "You are newcomers to this body, barely 3 decades among civilizations that have done what exactly?" Blackwood's voice sharpened. "Built empires on the bones of conquered peoples? Written laws that protect the powerful at the expense of the weak? Convinced yourselves that order and justice are the same thing?" The chamber erupted again. Delegates shouted, security officers moved to strategic positions, and several species began emergency evacuation procedures. "I demand the human delegation be censured." The Cathari ambassador was on her feet, spines fully extended. "This is an act of diplomatic aggression." "I haven't finished," Blackwood said, and something in her tone made the chamber fall silent again. "You asked what standing humanity has to judge you. Here is our standing." The holographic display changed. Now it showed not a map, but a list. Names, dates, locations, descriptions. 347 documented rescue operations conducted by human vessels in violation of galactic law, Blackwood read. 43,000 sentient beings saved from slavery, starvation, genocide, and exploitation. 18 illegal medical missions to planets the Council refused to assist.
12 evacuations of populations facing extinction, 7 direct military interventions against forces the Council designated not our concern. The numbers hung in the air, glowing with soft light. "This is the record of human law-breaking," Blackwood continued. "This is what your laws prevented us from doing through proper channels. So yes, we broke your laws. We did it knowingly, deliberately, and, I will say this plainly, righteously. Because your laws are not just." "Justice is determined by this body," Morthax thundered, "not by individual species acting unilaterally." "Then this body has failed." Blackwood met his compound eyes without flinching. And when institutions fail, when the systems designed to protect the innocent become tools of oppression, then individuals, and yes, species, must choose. They can follow unjust laws and share responsibility for the suffering those laws cause. Or they can defy those laws and accept the consequences. She paused, letting her words settle over the chamber like falling ash. "Humanity has made its choice. We are not ashamed of it, and we are not going to stop." The silence that followed was absolute. Then, from the back of the chamber, a single figure began to applaud. Heads turned, antennae twitched, visual sensors refocused. The applauding figure was a Yavashi, one of the species that had relocated to deep space to avoid hegemony integration. They should not have been present. They were not members of the Council. They had no legitimate access to these chambers. "How did they get in here?" someone demanded. More figures emerged from the shadows. Dothari refugees, their carapaces scarred with the marks of processing facilities they'd barely escaped. Chak adolescents freed from slave convoys, now grown into fierce-eyed adults who wore the memories of their captivity like armor. Representatives from a dozen species that the Council had forgotten, abandoned, or actively oppressed. "We were invited," the Yavashi said, their multitonal voice carrying clearly across the chamber, "by Commander Vexrath, who believed that the beings affected by your laws should have the opportunity to speak on them." "This is a violation of," Morthax began. "Of what? Your protocols, your procedures, your sacred laws?" The Yavashi stepped forward, their iridescent skin shimmering in the focused sunlight. "We have come to tell you the truth, High Counselor. Not the truth as your reports define it, but the truth as we have lived it." One by one, the unauthorized visitors spoke. They told stories of families separated, of cultures destroyed, of entire civilizations ground down by economic exploitation that the Council called trade agreements. They spoke of children sold for labor, of elders worked to death, of hope extinguished by the slow grinding of bureaucratic indifference. And they spoke of humans. "A ship called Unconquered found us in the dark sectors," a Chalk survivor said, her voice thick with emotion. "We had been in transit for 40 days. No food, no water. Some of us had already died. The humans destroyed the convoy, pulled us from the wreckage, and took us home. They didn't ask permission. They didn't file reports. They just saved us. When our planet's water supply was poisoned by hegemony mining operations," a Dothari elder rasped, "the Council declared the incident within acceptable parameters. Human ships arrived 3 days later with purification equipment. They stayed for 6 months, training our people to maintain the systems. They asked nothing in return, except that we remember." "We remember," the Yavashi said. "We all remember. And we have come to ask this council a question that humanity has been asking since they first learned of your laws. What are rules worth if they don't protect the innocent? The chamber had transformed. What began as an orderly session had become something unprecedented, a confrontation between the council and the beings it claimed to govern. Ambassador Blackwood stood at the center of the storm, her expression unreadable.
"High Counselor," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos, "I believe Commander Vexrath's challenge has been answered. The question now is what this body will do with the truth it has been given." Morthax stared at her, his compound eyes cycling through colors that signified emotions no human could read. Around him, the other council leaders exchanged uncertain glances. For 300 years, the Galactic Accords had stood unchallenged, the foundation of interstellar order, the framework that kept chaos at bay. And now, in the space of a single hour, humans had brought that framework crashing down. "This session is adjourned," Morthax finally said. "The Council will reconvene in 3 standard days to address these concerns." It was the first time in recorded history that a High Counselor had acknowledged that the Council might need to reconsider its laws. As the delegates filed out, most in stunned silence, some in heated argument, Blackwood remained at her platform. The unauthorized visitors approached her, offering gestures of gratitude in a dozen different cultural traditions. "Ambassador," the Yavashi said, "what you did today took remarkable courage. The Council will seek retribution." "Let them." Blackwood accepted their thanks with quiet dignity. Humanity didn't survive 2 world wars, a climate collapse, and a near-extinction event by backing down from bullies. We'll face whatever comes. "You truly believe you can change things?" Blackwood's smile was tired but genuine. "I believe we have to try. That's what humans do. We face impossible odds, we refuse to accept the world as it is, and we fight like hell to make it better." She glanced at the empty platform where Morthax had stood. "The Council isn't evil. Most of them genuinely believe they're doing what's best for the galaxy. But they've been in power so long that they've forgotten what it's like to be powerless. That's why we have to keep pushing, keep showing them the consequences of their choices. Eventually, the cognitive dissonance becomes unbearable. And if it doesn't? If they choose to remain blind? Then we keep saving lives anyway." Blackwood gathered her materials, preparing to leave. "That's the thing about doing what's right, my friend. You don't do it because you're guaranteed to win. You do it because it's right." The Yavashi watched her go, their multifaceted eyes reflecting something that might have been hope. Commander Vexrath stood in the observation lounge of the Korvani homeworld station, watching shuttles descend through the atmosphere. Each craft carried representatives from across the galaxy, some supporting his challenge, some opposing it, many simply curious to witness what promised to be a pivotal moment in interstellar history. "You've started something unprecedented," his aide observed. "The newscasts are calling it the conscience crisis. A dramatic name for what amounts to asking fundamental questions." Vexrath's mandibles clicked softly. "But I suppose drama serves a purpose. It makes people pay attention." "The Council is furious. High Counselor Morthax has privately requested your arrest on charges of inciting sedition." "Let him try." Vexrath turned from the viewport. "I've done nothing illegal. The challenge process is legitimate. The testimony of affected species is legitimate. The only thing I've done is force the Council to confront truths it has been avoiding for centuries."
"That may be the most illegal thing you could have done," his aide said dryly. "In politics, truth is often the most dangerous weapon." They were interrupted by an incoming communication. Priority, encrypted, origin tagged as human. Vexwrath activated the display. Captain Sarah Chen's face appeared, rendered slightly distorted by the interstellar transmission delay.
"Commander," she said, "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important."
Captain Chen. Vexwrath allowed himself a gesture of respect. "I'm surprised to hear from you. The Council has issued a warrant for your ship's impoundment."
They've issued several. We're choosing to interpret them as recommendations. Chen's smile was tired but triumphant. I wanted to let you know that we've just completed our 41st rescue mission since the inspection. A Palathi research station was attacked by pirates in the Void Straits. 12 survivors. They're being transported to medical facilities now.
The Void Straits are off-limits to military vessels, yes. We noticed. Chen leaned forward, her expression growing serious. "Commander, the Council is about to vote on your challenge. Whatever happens, I wanted you to know that what you did mattered. Not just for us, but for everyone you've inspired to question laws that don't deserve obedience."
Vexwrath was quiet for a moment. "When I boarded your vessel, I intended to make an example of you, to demonstrate that no one stands outside galactic law."
"And now?"
"Now I understand that some beings must stand outside unjust laws if the rest of us are to ever recognize their injustice." He straightened, his forearms crossing in the Korvani gesture of formal respect. "Whatever the Council decides, Captain, I am honored to have been changed by your example." "The honor is mutual, Commander." Chen's image flickered as the transmission began to degrade. "Stay safe, and don't give up." The connection terminated, and Vexwrath stood alone with his thoughts. In a few hours, the Council would vote. His challenge would either succeed or fail, and the consequences of either outcome would ripple across the galaxy for generations. But regardless of the vote, something had already changed. The humans had shown that there was another way, that laws were not sacred simply because they were old, that order without justice was not order at all, but a prison with prettier walls. And now, for better or worse, the galaxy would have to choose what kind of future it wanted. The vote took 11 hours. Delegates argued, bargained, threatened, and pleaded. Ancient alliances fractured under the weight of conflicting values. Species that had never spoken to each other found common ground in shared suffering. And through it all, the ghost of human defiance hung over the proceedings like a challenge none could ignore. When the final tally came, the result shocked everyone. Articles 334, 556, and 891 were struck from the Galactic Accords by a margin of 7 votes. A new framework for humanitarian intervention was approved. Enforcement protocols were revised to require ethical review. And perhaps most significantly, a committee was established to examine every law in the Accords for similar failures of justice. It was not a complete victory. The underlying power structures remained largely intact. Many species who had been harmed by the old laws would never see true justice for what they had suffered. And the entrenched interests that had benefited from the old system were already maneuvering to undermine the reforms. But it was a beginning. Ambassador Blackwood stood outside the council chambers as the results were announced, surrounded by journalists, diplomats, and curious observers from 100 worlds. "Ambassador, how do you respond to critics who say humans have destabilized the galactic order?" "I'd say the galactic order was already destabilized," Blackwood replied. "We just made it visible." Will human vessels cease their unauthorized missions now that reform has begun? Our vessels will continue to do what's right. If the Council's reforms genuinely protect the innocent, they won't have to operate outside the law. If the reforms fail, they'll be ready. Commander Vexwrath has been credited with initiating these changes. Some are calling him a hero. Others are calling for his execution. What's the human perspective? Blackwood paused, choosing her words carefully. Vexwrath is proof that courage isn't a human monopoly. He saw injustice, recognized it for what it was, and chose to act despite knowing the cost. That's heroism by any species definition. She looked directly into the camera. And to anyone who wants him executed, you'll have to go through us first. The journalists erupted with follow-up questions, but Blackwood was already walking away. In the crowds outside the council complex, beings from dozens of species watched the broadcasts. Many had traveled great distances to witness this moment. They were the forgotten ones, the species too small to have a voice, the individuals too powerless to matter, the victims of laws that had never been designed with their welfare in mind. And for the first time in their lives, they dared to hope. 6 months later, the HSS Unconquered drifted in deep space, its engines cooling after a month-long patrol through the former contested zones. Captain Chen sat in her ready room, reviewing reports from across human space. The reforms were taking hold, slowly but surely. Enforcement officers were questioning orders that seemed unjust. Colonies that had been cut off were receiving aid. And the committee examining the accords had already identified 17 more articles for revision. But there was still so much work to do. A knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. "Enter." Commander Park stepped in, his face carrying an expression she couldn't quite read. "Captain, we've received a message from Command. They're reassigning us." "To where?" Park handed her a data tablet. Chen read it twice, certain she must be misunderstanding. "This can't be right." "It's right. The Council has formally requested human participation in the reform process. They want ships with experience in humanitarian intervention to help train new enforcement teams." Park allowed himself a rare smile. "They've specifically asked for the Unconquered and her crew." Chen stared at the orders. Everything they had fought for, everything they had risked, it was leading somewhere. Not to punishment or exile, but to change. "Inform the crew," she said finally. "We deploy in 48 hours." Park nodded and turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Captain, what do you think will happen when we get there? The Council hasn't exactly welcomed us in the past." Chen considered the question. "Honestly, I don't know. Maybe they'll work with us in good faith. Maybe they'll try to undermine everything we've accomplished. Maybe this is all an elaborate trap." She stood, walking to the viewport to gaze at the stars. "But that's never been the point, has it? We don't do what's right because we know it will work. We do it because it's right." "And if it doesn't work?" Chen's reflection smiled in the viewport glass. "Then we find another way. That's what humans do." The Unconquered fired its engines and leaped toward the future, carrying its crew into unknown territory, not just in space, but in the very fabric of galactic civilization. Behind them lay decades of defiance. Ahead lay the possibility of transformation. And somewhere, in a small cabin aboard the ship, an ancient sword rested in its display case, a reminder of who they had been, what they had survived, and why they fought. The arc of the moral universe was long, but it was bending. #Epilogue 100 years later. The ceremony took place in the Grand Assembly of the Galactic Union,
the successor organization to the Council, reformed after decades of human-inspired transformation. Representatives from over 200 species filled the tiered seating, their varied forms creating a mosaic of life that would have been unimaginable a century before.
At the center of the assembly stood a memorial, a simple metal blade, curved and ancient, mounted on a velvet cushion beneath a single spotlight. The blade that Captain Sarah Chen had carried aboard the Unconquered. The blade that had been documented during that fateful inspection 100 years ago. And beside it, a second artifact, a set of Korvani prayer beads, worn smooth by decades of use. "We gather today," the High Counselor announced, "a Yavashi, the first of their species to hold the position, to commemorate the centennial of the conscience crisis, and to honor those who taught us that law without justice is no law at all." In the audience, beings from every corner of the galaxy listened. Many wore the uniform of the Humanitarian Corps, the organization that had evolved from human rescue missions into a galaxy-wide force for protection of the innocent. Others bore the marks of species that had been saved, rebuilt, restored to dignity after centuries of oppression. And in the human section, a small group of elderly visitors sat with hands folded and eyes bright. They were the last living crew members of the Unconquered, their bodies aged by time, but their spirits undiminished. 100 years ago, the High Counselor continued, humans taught us something that should have been obvious. They taught us that individuals matter, that suffering is never acceptable, no matter how many laws justify it, that the measure of a civilization is not its power, but its mercy. The holograms activated, showing images from across the century, rescue missions that had saved millions, reforms that had transformed the nature of interstellar law. And again, the faces of humans, stubborn, defiant, impossibly committed to doing what was right. We called them lawbreakers. We called them criminals. We tried to force them to conform to rules that they recognized as unjust, and when they refused, we thought them primitive. The High Counselor's multitonal voice softened. They were not primitive. They were prophets. They saw the future we could have, and they refused to accept the future we had. And because of them, because of their courage, their sacrifice, their absolute unwillingness to abandon their principles, we stand here today as a union instead of a hegemony, as partners instead of subjects, as beings worthy of the stars we inhabit. The elderly humans sat straighter in their seats. Some wept. Others simply smiled, remembering. In honor of those who shattered our unjust laws and rebuilt them with mercy, the High Counselor concluded, "We dedicate this memorial. May it remind us always that conscience is not a weakness, but the greatest strength a civilization can possess." The assembly rose as one, offering the traditional gesture of respect that had evolved from human handshakes and Korvani arm crosses and a dozen other cultural practices, a gesture of connection, of recognition, of shared purpose. And in that moment, in that vast assembly of beings from across the galaxy, something remarkable became clear. The humans had not merely changed the laws. They had changed the soul of a civilization. In the end, we did not conquer the stars through military might or economic dominance. We did it through something far more powerful, something every species possesses, but few have the courage to follow. Conscience. When our descendants look back at this era, I hope they will understand that every small act of defiance mattered. Every life saved in violation of unjust laws was a vote for a better future.
Every human who chose to do what was right, regardless of consequences, was building the foundation of a galaxy that could finally call itself just. We were not perfect. We made mistakes. Some of our methods were questionable, and not every mission succeeded. But we kept trying, kept pushing, kept refusing to accept that suffering was inevitable, or that laws could justify cruelty.
And eventually, the universe caught up.
To those who follow us, human and otherwise, I offer this final thought. Never let them tell you that you're too small to make a difference. Never let them convince you that the way things are is the way they must be. Never surrender your conscience to the demands of an unjust order. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. If you're brave enough to bend it. From the final memoir of Captain Sarah Chen, written 1 week before her death at age 127, now required reading in academies across the Galactic Union.